Welcome. Today we will be discussing ceilings. Ceilings play a significant role in how people feel in a particular space. If the ceilings are too high, the occupant may feel small and insignificant. Too low, people may feel threatened or confined. Interior designers intentionally manipulate the scale of a ceiling to evoke specific responses, create dramatic impact, or challenge the notion that a ceiling is simply a covering over our heads. We can categorize ceilings as having two methodologies of attachment. Gypsum board, plaster, metal, and other materials can be attached directly to joists, rafters, and concrete slabs above. Fibrous panels, known as acoustic ceiling tiles or ACT, are lightweight boards made of mineral or glass fibers that are highly sound absorptive. They might look familiar to you. They are easily laid into an exposed recess or concealed grid of light gauge metal tees suspended with hangers. I'll be showing you that more samples a little later. Good acoustical ceiling tiles have a very high noise reduction coefficient, NRC, meaning that they absorb the majority of the sound that reach them, while gypsum and plaster, by contrast, have a very low noise reduction coefficient, meaning sound reflects off of those materials. The space between the structure above and the ceiling suspended below is called the plenum, right in that area between the deck above and the drop ceiling below is called the plenum, and provides a zone for ductwork, piping, conduit, and other equipment. Depending upon the ceiling type, either an access door is provided or a ceiling tile can be removed, allowing access to the plenum area for maintenance of equipment and systems. Here you can see an access door, access door, access door, or the ceiling tile can be popped out of its grid. It is our responsibility to identify the spaces and the tasks within the space and to verify the number of foot candles required for the task, as well as to analyze the daylight in the space to determine the need for artificial lighting. Reflectance values from the ceiling influence these calculations. In addition to standard flat ceilings, designers may want to use the ceiling as a design feature to create a sense of movement or otherwise reinforce the design. Interior designers use the ceiling plane to delineate space, assist in wayfinding, and enhance the overall conceptual approach of the design intent. Lighting solutions can be severely impacted by a lack of coordination with other trades, such as having a piece of piping or ductwork where a light needs to be located. A variety of fluorescent light fixtures or LED light fixtures are available in sizes which fit perfectly in a suspended ceiling grid, as do mechanical supply registers and return ducts. A ceiling can function to conceal the necessary but perhaps unsightly elements which our buildings need to function. Now we're going to run through the next slides at your own pace to discover many different approaches to the ceiling design. We have exposed timber structure, where the structure made out of wood is actually the design intent. We have open grid suspended ceilings, where we can stand away and in perspective view see only a plane of a material. If we stand and look up under that very material, we'll see that it's perforated, and we can look up directly into the plenum above and perhaps see the piping, the ductwork, and the wiring. We have gypsum wallboard ceilings. More on that in a few minutes. We have plaster ceiling. Again, more of that in a few minutes. We have vaulted ceilings. We have cathedral ceilings, tray ceilings, structural tile ceilings. Those are synonymous with the name Guastavino. Guastavino family came from Italy and introduced this system into the United States in the late 1800s. Known also as the tile arch. The tile of this vault is a thinner masonry tile than with traditional arches and produces less horizontal thrust due to its light weight. By interlocking, you can see hopefully the interlock here, by interlocking the tiles with layers of quick-drying mortar to form a thin skin, and by following the curve of the roof in a herringbone pattern, as opposed to being horizontally set, the arches and vaults are self-supporting. We have dome ceilings. We have coffered ceilings, sometimes referred to as a waffle ceiling. Kind of looks like a waffle. They give three-dimensionality to the ceiling, meaning they give shadow lines and depth. We have a soffit, not exactly a ceiling type, but a portion of the ceiling framed out, often to conceal lighting or ductwork or piping. We have light cove wall wash. So it's a cove or a niche embedded into the ceiling or integrated into the ceiling on the job for locating a light. In this case, it's a wall wash. The light in the cove washes down the face of the wall. In another instance, we have another type of niche or cove lighting, which lights up lighting, and you can see here the lighting reflects off the ceiling, a light color ceiling generally, and then down to the floor for people to be able to have illumination. We have painted ceilings. They provide a coming together of architectural and sculptural effects. You can ask yourself in these photographs, what is two-dimensional and what in these photographs is three-dimensional? It's very hard to distinguish. We have tin ceilings, sheets of tin embossed in the factory and then hung side by side to form an overall pattern. Generally now available at the big box home improvement stores. The complexity, these are specialty ceilings. The complexity of specialty ceilings actually act to hide the mechanical system in the otherwise exposed plenum. That is, if you stand and look up into a specialty ceiling, you probably can see into the plenum, not unlike the open grid ceilings that I spoke about earlier. Experiencing these rooms in perspective, however, the plenum and all it contains are out of view. An acoustical ceiling tile is not a high design material, as some manufacturers have tried to convince the design industry. We'll see those a little later on in this lecture as well. And gypsum wallboard ceilings, I spoke a little about already, that within the residential housing market, these are the most common ceiling finishes of all. Gypsum wallboard ceilings are also desirable to many commercial and hospitality clients who have the budget to afford them. Let's talk a little more in depth now about gypsum wallboard ceilings. Except in residential settings where gypsum wallboard can be attached directly to the underside of the wood framing of the floor above, gypsum wallboard ceilings in commercial applications is more labor intensive because it requires a secondary support system. Unwanted sound is called noise, and it is the responsibility of the designer to anticipate possible sources of noise and control this potential nuisance. It is also the designer's responsibility to promote good acoustics and support speech privacy where needed by the client. It is important to remember we need for future accessibility as well into the plenum. As such, the location of access panels is a matter for close coordination between the designer and the mechanical engineers, with the responsibility for any aesthetic impact on the room remaining with the interior designer. Now follow along with the next slides and we will learn together the construction sequences involved to hang a hefty gypsum wallboard ceiling. start with a 1/4-inch pencil rod. This is a 1/4-inch pencil rod. It goes into a small clip angle, you can see here or here, screwed or fastened, not screwed or fastened into the metal deck above. So I don't have the actual clip angle in my bag of tricks here, but you can imagine this is the metal deck above, the clip angle is secured to the metal deck, and then I hang the pencil rod from the clip angle. Once I have the pencil rod hanging, I'm going to take what is called a friction clip. This is a picture of a friction clip. This is an actual friction clip, and install it onto the pencil rod. So I have to squeeze the friction clip, and once I let go, it grabs on tightly to the pencil rod. So I have a pencil rod and I have a friction clip. These are located about every 4 feet on center, these clip angles and pencil rods, to the bottom side of the metal deck. I am going to attach a 1.5-inch black metal channel. C for channel. From your point of view, yep, C for channel. This slides simply, well, not so simply, but this will slide into that friction clip, relieving some of the pressure on the clip, slides right in. So now I have my deck above, my clip, my pencil rod extends down to the height of the ceiling in the room with the black iron hanging off the friction clip. To this whole assembly, I'm going to add a furring clip, furring channel clip. It looks like that. It looks like that. So it simply hangs from the black iron. And now I'm going to take a piece of furring channel. I talked to you about it before. It's often called a hat channel because it looks like a hat. Here it is in this drawing alongside it. I'm going to hang this furring channel into the clip. And now we have our assembly of fur ceiling hanging from the deck above. And now, once we have that all assembled, we are simply going to take our gypsum wallboard and screw it into those upside down hat channels. And then we finish it off as we would with a rock wall or partition. Meaning tape, spackle, ready for paint. At the edges, where the ceiling will meet the actual wall partitions, we hang at the ceiling height a wall angle. It's 1 inch by 1 inch. And that piece of gypsum board, we will attach a galvanized wall angle to the wall at the height of the ceiling. Screw the wall angle through the wall or partition and screw the gypsum board into that bottom flange of that angle to secure it. Then we tape and spackle the corners. I hope you have followed that. An ancillary feature which can be added to a gypsum wallboard ceiling, as I said earlier, is a light cove that washes the wall with light. I mentioned this earlier. If you take a look at the illustration in this slide, It demonstrates how the width of the cove affects the amount of light washing the wall. Another ancillary feature which can be added to a gypsum wallboard ceiling is a light cove that washes upward to bathe the ceiling in light. This uplight reflects off the ceiling surface and indirectly illuminates the wall and the floor, depending, as the illustration shows, upon the arrangement of the lights themselves. Here you have two different types of indirect lighting. I mentioned the soffit before. Here's how a soffit is drawn. This is a detail. The soffit is an informal term for any kind of boxed-in area that hides structural elements of construction, such as beams, arches, or stairs, or services. Services include heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, we refer to as HVAC, ductwork, electrical wires, and plumbing pipes. A soffit has no structural purpose unto itself. So here you can see a wood frame soffit being formed, and perhaps it's going to have some lights in it. Maybe there'll be some future piping from the bathroom upstairs. The waste lines need gravity flow, so maybe those pipes are running at a slight decline to get to the sewer in the street. Plaster ceiling systems, as with plaster wall systems, the best results can be had with plaster ceilings, including an excellent substrate for high gloss paint finish. It's another alternative for a gypsum type ceiling. And as with plaster wall systems, plastering the ceiling is the most expensive and labor intensive method. Gypsum and plaster have very low noise reduction coefficient numbers. We spoke about that earlier. They reflect sound rather than absorb sound. And as I said, access panels are a must for servicing what's up above the plaster in the plenum. So now let's follow along and talk about plaster ceiling construction sequence. Plaster is going to be even heavier than the boards of gypsum wallboard sheets. So we first start again with the clip angle securely fastened to the metal deck above, or maybe it's a concrete floor that was already preformed, there's no metal deck, but it's got to be securely fastened to the structure up above. We hang to that clip the pencil rod, which we've already spoken about, inserted the friction clip as well with the 1.5 inch metal channel, and from that metal channel, which we can actually extend down by adding an additional pencil rod to the friction clip in case we really have to adjust the height of the ceiling if it's really a far distance from the structural slab above. To that 1.5 inch channel, we're going to tie a piece of malleable metal wire. This is similar to what we're talking about. And we're going to simply tie another channel to the bottom of this channel, equal size, half size, 3/4 inch. You can see it here. We're going to tie a 3/4 inch black iron metal channel, 16 inches on center, to the bottom of this metal channel using and tie it around the first channel and hang from it a smaller 3/4 inch black iron piece. I don't have a small one. This is a big one. Obviously way bigger than what we need. But this would hang from here, supported by the metal wire. And that would form the base onto which we would put our galvanized metal lath. Screw it right in there. Galvanized metal lath so it doesn't rust. Screwed to the 3/4 inch metal channel, which is tied to the 1.5 inch black iron pipe. These are some other types, smaller, pre-cut, ready to be installed pieces of that malleable metal wire. Here's some actual wires you can hopefully see attached. Here's the galvanized metal lath attached to that 3/4 inch black iron channel. Once we have the metal lath attached, as I just described, we start with our 3 coats. We have our scratch coat, goes into the wire, keyed in, hopefully penetrates sufficiently, forms the base for the rest of our plaster application. We have the brown coat, adding bulk to the mass of the installation, and then a very thin finish coat, smooth and ready to be painted. 2 coats or 3 coats of plaster. Here you can see a cross section of what I'm speaking about. You can see it's very labor intensive, and once the 2 coats are 2 or 3 coats are applied, you can be adding decoration or different types of moldings for decoration, and get ready to sand it smooth and paint it. So this plaster application, you have to really appreciate the labor of love which is plaster work. So it reveals a real skilled tradesman at their craft. So you do have to hire highly skilled and trained workmen for this type of work. So here's a sample of a plaster ceiling being applied over some wood lath. Obviously these are some old renovations being done, hence we have the wood lath. I want you to notice in the detail here that the armature of the arch is made from standard and stock metal components. So we have the pencil rods, we have the friction clips, we have the channel iron, 1 3/4, and then we still have the, 1.5 inch, and then we still have the 3/4 inch channels placed around in a shape that we want to try to accomplish for our arch. So we're still using standard metal component parts, and we're still using the galvanized metal lath for this plaster system. So I want to show you here that this is a ground. You see the X? The ground is still a piece of wood. We say it is because we cut through it and we put an X through that otherwise empty rectangle at the end cut of a piece of wood. So we located the ground. Now imagine a similarly placed ground at the opposite end of the arch. At the opposite end of the arch. And another ground at the top midpoint of the arch, like up here. So the tradesman cuts a piece of plywood templated to match the curvature of the arch, which you as the designer has determined. When they pull that templated piece of plywood parallel to the arch, while pressing the template against each of those grounds, smoothing the plaster surface as it travels, lowering high points and filling in low points with the excess plaster, the arch is created. The arch shape or form is created. When completed, they can seal the exposed grounds with trim. So here's the ground, and you can see a piece of trim here and a piece of trim here, so that otherwise piece of wood that we call the ground would be visible. So we want to decoratively hide it. We now have spoken about gypsum wallboard ceilings, GWB ceilings. We've talked about full plaster ceiling systems, and just like when we spoke about walls, we have an intermediate methodology, not as expensive as full plaster, but and a superior finish from gypsum wallboard. It's called veneer plaster ceiling systems, and the advantages are the same as we spoke about when we spoke about veneer plaster wall systems. More rapid installation, which reduces overall construction time. The appearance and surface quality of conventional full plaster, but at a much lower cost than conventional plaster. High resistance to cracking, nail popping, impact and abrasion failure. and mill mixed plaster components, which help ensure uniform installation performance and finished job quality. So this is a good time to remind ourselves of the impact which surface absorption and reflectivity have on acoustics. Thin panels, such as the gypsum wallboard that we've been talking about, tend to pass the sound through, which limits acoustical privacy in spaces with a shared plenum. Composite materials with acoustical material laminated to a substrate help alleviate this problem. Acoustical panels may involve other materials such as a perforated metal, mylar, fabric, or tecton. I have here a sample of an acoustical ceiling material, which on one side looks like acoustical material and on the other side has an acoustical absorptive material adhered to it. Acoustical ceilings are the mainstay of commercial installations, mainly because a suspended ceiling provides easy access to the plenum, but also because a quiet environment increases productivity, whereas a noiseless environment is easily disruptive. So here is some utilitarian ceilings. We often see these in retail stores, classrooms, offices. Hopefully you recognize this. They have a lot of fissures or a lot of different ways to increase the surface area of the acoustical material itself to absorb greater sound than if it was just a smooth ceiling panel, although those are available as well. Again, we must consider the client's desires and their budget, as well as future maintenance issues. Here's a guy trying to get up above a ceiling. He's got to do some repairs. There's another guy popping out a tile, or maybe he's putting that tile back after having gotten up there. So way more accessible up to the plenum than a gypsum wallboard or plaster ceiling. I hope that's self-evident. So we've talked about the method for suspending a plaster ceiling from the structure up above, as well as plaster veneer ceiling from the structure up above. But our most type of common ceiling are acoustical ceiling tiles, and we're going to talk about now how those ceilings are constructed. Now, within the 5 boroughs of New York City, there's a requirement unlike any other place in most of the country. It's stricter, and we're going to talk about that first, of how those ceilings, acoustical ceilings, comes 2x4 or 2x2. We spoke about those types of ceilings, and the regulations for putting those ceilings is much more strict in New York City than it is throughout much of the rest of the country. So we're going to talk about first how the sequence of construction within New York City for acoustical ceiling tiles works. It begins, of course, with the clip angle securely fastened to the structure up above. From that, we're going to hang the pencil rod and the friction clip. If we don't have a pencil rod long enough, we can add a pencil rod to that friction clip to bring down the location of the hanger assembly, right? So maybe we can't get down to 8 feet from the structure up above with a single pencil rod, so we have to hang another rod from that first pencil rod by way of the friction clip. So we're going to attach to that friction clip and attach to that friction clip the 1.5 inch channel, black iron we call it, as we discussed earlier. And then we're going to put a hanger onto that channel. And that's specially made to accept, see where we are after this, specially made to accept a rod hanger over it. To the hanger, we are going to attach a ceiling tee. Looks like this, come in long runs, 12 foot, can see, I can't get it off here, so it's securely attached to the hanger. This is what it looks like. These are spaced every 24 inches on center, because our acoustical ceiling tiles come, as I said, 2 foot by 2 foot or 2 foot by 4 foot, and they're just going to rest there and there, just like that. Here you can see that T that I just showed you suspended from the hanger. Here's that T, and the ceiling tiles come from each side and sit on each side of that upside down T shape. We have the main runner, comes usually like 12 foot long, and into that main runner, say this is the main runner, into that main runner we have small cross T's that clip in and hang at the hang on the same plane, and those are what form around the ends of the 2x2 or 2x4 tiles. Again, at the perimeter we still have a wall angle attached to the partition, and then the bottom leg of that wall angle is where the bottom of the acoustical ceiling tile will sit, just like that. So here's my wall, I've attached it to my wall, and then that ceiling tile will just sit on top of it. And the other side sits on the cross T's or the main T, just like that. Here you can see the snapping in of the T's to the main runners, and the main runner or T sitting on top of the perimeter wall angle. Now these tiles do come 2x2 or 2x4, as do the light fixtures that we need to be able to inset into the grid, as do the ceiling registers and the ceiling supply for HVAC. Sometimes you will have to cut. They're easy to cut with a mat knife. They're only about a ½ inch thick and soft and lightweight. So that's how it works in New York City. Outside of New York City, instead of having the pencil rod, we're not required to have such a piece of heavy 1/4 inch steel. We can get by with a piece of malleable wire. So it's a similar situation, except we substitute a piece of wire to hang from the clip fastened to the deck above, structural deck above, and we simply tie that wire into one of the holes of the cross T's or runners. So let's talk about a few more design considerations regarding these acoustical ceiling types. So as you can see here, the grid can come as simply a T, which means you would end up with an effect where the panel and the T's were essentially flush, something to this effect. Probably looks very familiar. It's what we see in most classrooms. It's simple and effective. The panels, again, 2x2, you can see here and there, and also available in 2x4. You can also do a combination of 2x2 and 2x4 in a room if necessary. This is called a tegular square edge to the ceiling tile. So I think I have a couple of those. Maybe you can see here, it's hopefully, I still have the plastic on these samples, but hopefully you can see that edge gives you a little shadow line, a little more articulation. Here's a good picture of it, and here's what it looks like installed. So showing you the ceiling tiles drop a little below the actual grid and gives just a hint of a shadow line, a little additional dimensionality to your ceiling design. In an exaggerated form, we can use the angled tegular instead of being square like the previous one. You can use an angle, gives you even a more hefty modulation of the tile appearance. And you can use a thin line grid with an extra shadow line in between. I know this is a little hard to see. Here's what the grid looks like, a little clearer here. Here's what the grid looks like. It has a fine line right down the center. So you have a tile here and a tile here. So, as I said earlier, the manufacturers are trying to sell us as designers on the fact that there are some aesthetic or design attributes to this very vanilla approach to ceilings. This is a concealed, I don't have a sample of concealed tile with me, but you can see that the grid insets or is inserted into the edge of the ceiling tile itself, and you really get more of a monolithic appearance to the ceiling. You still do see some of the joints, but in a job well done, you really don't see very many of the joints. This is a very difficult connection to get the plane of this ceiling tile to be flush with the plane of the adjacent ceiling tile. So this approach is not used that often. It's very difficult to achieve. And imagine if you needed to get up into that plenum, you probably would want an access panel, because you could never do that once it's installed. You could never undo that and then redo it successfully. So that type of concealed grid, you would want to inset your own ceiling access panel. Those access panels, I should say, don't need to go too often in a ceiling, whether it's plaster or veneer plaster. They only need to go where the equipment is. So there's an HVAC unit in one location that's servicing the whole area of the building. You only have to put it there under the equipment for access to the equipment. Maybe occasionally there might be a juncture in the joint, a juncture in the ductwork, or a place where pipe valve is that might need to be turned on or turned off seasonally. So you need access there, but most everywhere else you don't need it. Just where there is critical equipment for maintenance and operating. So those were splines or joints of grid that were visible to us, and then the one that I just referenced was concealed spline, not supposedly visible to us. Then we have semi-concealed, where you can actually see just a portion of the grid system. It gives you a little wider gap. And the material, the acoustical material itself, has different design. One could be random, one could be directional fissures, one could be just holes, one could be holes and large fissures. Can have backing, acoustical backing to the face of the acoustical panel. I have a sample here. Oh, here it is. So here's a lay-in tile piece with an acoustical back. So added batting insulation for additional acoustical sound absorption. The other thing that this is nice about this is a type of ceiling that can be easily washed or easily cleaned, so they're often used in kitchens, so to be keeping the place sanitary. This is a wood simulated metal acoustical tile. You can see the holes in it, hopefully. Oops, just like that. Has holes in it. It's also available with sound batting, so that once the sound penetrates those little holes, we don't want the sound to reflect back into the room. We don't want a silent piece. Those little holes, it gets sucked up and absorbed within that piece of bat insulation or sound insulation. Here's this piece of metal ceiling grid. I'm sorry, metal ceiling panel sets into a grid. Has an absorptive felt adhered to the back. So just to finish up, we want to talk about the best way to align our ceiling in a room. We want to make sure that when we do lay out our ceiling, because it's called a reflected ceiling grid, where we're going to draw our light fixture locations and sizes to scale, and we're going to locate our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning vents and registers and supplies and sprinkler heads and very many other things. We want to make sure that our ceiling tile is either centered in the room, so we have a ceiling full center, so we have a full tile centered on the room center line. Here's a room, center line location, and we want to make sure we have a full ceiling tile split evenly around those center points. And then we work out towards the perimeters, and only the perimeter tiles will need to be cut to fit, while the others are full size ceiling tiles. Within that pattern, we can put a 2x4 light fixture, we can put a return duct, air supply, sprinkler heads, and lighting, as I said. So one approach is to put a full tile in the room center line and work out to the perimeter. The other approach is to take the center line again and use that as a starting point only for the ceiling tiles. Not splitting a ceiling tile like we did in the previous slide, but using that center line and centering our first joints on it. So, and then work out towards the perimeter, and then only the perimeter ceiling tiles again need to be cut to fit. So it's up to you as a designer to take your choice in which method works best for the layout of the things that will be appearing in your ceiling plane. So thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.